All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off. We were talking about the wars of German unification, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and get back to it. So, little review time. Who was the Chancellor of Deutschland? Oh, excuse me, no. The Chancellor of Prussia as of 1862?
Bismarck.
Otto von Bismarck. And who was he serving under? Who was his king?
Friedrich Wilhelm
Wilhelm the First. Okay. And so, who, by the way, is running France at that same time?
Napoleon
III. Okay, what was his name before they became the Second Empire? Louis Napoleon. Exactly. Okay, so Napoleon III is hanging out over in France. Meanwhile, Italy, they're working on unification. And who is the Prime Minister of Sardinia Piedmont? Who's trying to unify Italy through a risorgimento. What's his name?
Giuseppe Garibaldi.
No?
No.
We'll see him in a minute.
Mazzini.
Camillo Cavour! All right, Camillo Cavour, the rather corpulent Prime Minister of Sardinia Piedmont. And who is his king? Your names?
Giuseppe.
Oh, come on, you wrote it down. It's sitting right in front of you, potentially.
No, I don't.
Victor Emmanuel!
Yeah, I didn't know.
His name is
Who is he?
Oh,
see, there it is.
He was the king of Sardinia Piedmont.
I don't see
So,
it.
Victor Emmanuel, king of Sardinia Piedmont. The prime minister is? Oh God, I just said it.
Cavour.
Wow.
Cavour.
I hope these YouTube viewers, my two viewers, are thoroughly displeasured right now. Okay, yes, thank you.
Cavour.
Camillo Cavour. Thank you. Okay. Now, Camillo Cavour is trying to slowly unify Italy through a process of diplomacy and a little bit of limited war against the Austrians. And so that's working pretty well until late 1860s. We've got a revolutionary using Mazzinian republicanism and nationalism as his methods of unifying Italy. Who's that man? Giuseppe Garibaldi. All right, excuse me, Giuseppe Garibaldi. Very good. All right, so that brings us back to Prussia and Otto von Bismarck. Meanwhile, so what's his first war that he's going to fight in order to start to slowly unify Prussia?
So the War of Schleswig-Holstein.
All right, Schleswig-Holstein, exactly. And then what's he going to do next? Because the other culturally German folk are feeling left out. Austro-Prussian War. And how's that going to go for Prussia?
Not good.
It's going to go awesome. 7 weeks war because they owned them in battle, right? Okay, and how nice is Bismarck going to be in the peace treaty?
Really nice.
Why?
So we can gain
So that they'll be
An
allies.
ally to the south, exactly. Now it's time to take on the dirty French. Okay, so the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 and 71 is going to happen primarily because Prussia has unified in the north. They have a North German federation with Wilhelm I being their president, right? And then you've got the Reichstag, which is running the show through representation, and then Otto von Bismarck, the man with all the real power here, as chancellor. So, what Bismarck wants to do now is unify the North with those southern Catholic states. Now, why did the southern German Catholic states have a hard time with the northern German states? They were Protestants. So that was one big thing, the religious issue. The other issue is that the southern Catholic states had always been a little more independent. They had always been fearful of some of the militarism that they saw up there in northern Germany and Prussia. Because Bavaria, tell me about Bavaria. That's one of those southern Catholic states. Lots of beer. Yes, they have lots of beer drinking. They have a good time sitting around eating their Stroopwafels and wearing their Lederhosen and having their cuckoo clocks. And, they're not the goose-stepping, Sieg Heiling type, right? However, we see that from where? Where do we see the goose-stepping militarism with the pointy helmets that just want to impale you? All right, from Prussia, exactly. So, they're fearful of that. They don't want that. And so now what Bismarck wants to do is harness nationalism in order to get them on his side. So what he will do is, before we get to this bullet, you can write that down while I'm yammering on here, but I forgot to mention here, the reason this whole war started, okay, it had been kind of brewing for a while, because how did Napoleon III feel about a strong northern German federation on his eastern border all of a sudden? How do you feel about that?
Not a fan.
Not a big fan. It's upsetting the European balance of power, and so he's nervous. He's trying to get the Austrians to turn their backs to Prussia, start to fight back against them. Not working, though, thankfully, because Bismarck is such a good diplomat. And so the French, they're looking for an issue here with which to start a war, as is Bismarck, waiting for the spark. And so what will he do in order to create a diplomatic controversy that will bring about warfare? Anyone know? Okay, so what will happen is, in 1870, there's going to be a diplomat hanging out at the Bad Aachen spas. Very nice spas, by the way. Been there, awesome. So, hanging out at the Bad Aachen spas in Germany, and he was talking with Wilhelm I. And so it was a French diplomat, French ambassador, talking to Wilhelm I. Now, I'd like to imagine the scene. I don't know that it went down exactly like this, but I like to imagine the scene. These guys hanging out in a hot tub, just sitting there, you know, talking, and then all of a sudden, getting angry at each other and yelling at each other in different languages. Because that's essentially what happened. When they're sitting at this spa, having a meeting, they just got really mad at each other for whatever reason, right? And so each one started sending telegrams back home to say what happened. So Bismarck intercepted these telegrams, right? And what did he do with the telegrams? Changed them, exactly. So with the Prussian telegram that was going back to Berlin, what did he say in that one? Oh, the dirty French! They're trying to take us off! They want a war with us! And then meanwhile, the telegram that was going back to Paris, what did he say in that one?
Oh, we outnumber them. Good coat. This part right here is weak. And
Yes, exactly. So he's telling the French, oh no, the dirty Germans, they're trying to fight us, and oh, we can totally beat them in war, and oh, here's where they're weak, and we can totally win this thing. All right, so both sides getting real uppity about this thing, and it's perfect for Bismarck, because he knows that this will work to his advantages big time. All right, so here's some reasons that everyone thought the French would win in 1870. I mean, they were like, all right, you took down Austria and Prussia, way to go, but no one can take down Napoleon II's Napoleon III's Second French Republic. No one can take that thing down. And so the reason they thought that was because the French had the best rifles in the world at this time, the most accurate and fastest firing rifles in the world. And another thing that they had going for them was the machine gun. They had a Gatling gun that they had started to use on the field of battle, and so that was terrifyingly awesome. And by the way, anyone remember the name of the rifle that they used? Remember the Germans used a Krupp rifle? What the French used? The Chespot. And the Chespot was a breech-loading rifle as well. Okay. And then they also had a superior navy. The French had always had a better navy than the Germans, because the Germans, they're a new country at this point. They haven't had time to build a navy, nor do they really have any warm water ports with which to do it yet. All right, and so they've definitely got the better navy here. And then they also had been told by both Austria and Italy that in the event of war with Prussia, that both Austria and Italy would support Napoleon III's France. Okay, it looks brilliant for France here, doesn't it? So Napoleon III, going into this thing, thinks that the Second Republic of France has got himself Austria and Italy in an alliance. He thinks he's got better weaponry, thinks he's got better strategy, thinks he's got a better navy. What's the reality? What really happened here? Did it go well for France? No. Why not? Because Prussia was prepared. Bismarck had planned this thing perfectly with his general staff, right? So, first of all, the frontal Prussian artillery. The close-range frontal Prussian artillery that was more accurate, far more deadly, and faster firing because it was breech-loading. Blew away the French entirely. So, therefore, they were far enough away so that the rifles would not hit them as easily, right? But they were still close enough to do some serious damage with our artillery. So, therefore, what are they neutralizing here in the perceived French advantages?
Top two.
Okay, the top two, exactly. All right, another thing that's going to happen is the Prussians are going to stay back far enough with their artillery, but then the French, they're not going to use their weapons very wisely here. They won't even use the machine gun because they were afraid, rightly so I would say, that they would shoot their own guys. Okay, why is it kind of fearful to use the Gatling gun at this time? They didn't, they were still learning how to do this thing. They didn't realize it, because, it's basically like a cannon. You guys remember what the Gatling gun looks like? It's got big cannon wheels on the side, and then it's got, I think it's 6 barrels in front, and then you turn it with a crank, and it goes fires these massive rounds of bullets, right? So, it's an interesting gun, certainly, but it's not an easy one to shoot, because they've got their guys out in front of them, and then they're just going... Oh, wait, that shot our own guys. So they decided after a couple times, maybe we won't use the machine gun. And so therefore, that perceived advantage, not really helping them. Plus, they thought, oh, hey, we got the big Navy. We're going to need a Navy in this war? No, it's a land war. Who needs the Navy in a land war, right? And so it's not like they're going to be able to do much with the blockade either. So therefore, not going to work out for them. Plus, they thought they had friends in both Austria and Italy. Is that going to be the case for France? Why not? Why will Austria not be their friend? Austria is now staying with Prussia, and so they will maintain a neutrality here, although it kind of looks like an alliance on paper, doesn't it? Okay, and then Italy, remember Italy, when did they get stabbed in the back? By Napoleon III. When he didn't go to war with them in 1859 against Austria. So is Italy going to help them out? No. No! And then plus, Bismarck had already sent some messages over to Italy saying, hey buddy, if you guys stay out of this, what is Italy going to get out of it? All right, they're going to be allowed to have their unification in 1871. And so Austria will remain neutral. Should have also put in there that Italy will remain neutral. They will not get involved in this thing either. And so Paul Kennedy, remember, he tells us it looked like the French were going to win big time, and yet they didn't, because military might is what? Relative. Military might is relative. What's that mean? Military might is relative to?
You don't have the good leaders.
Okay.
No, relative to the
forces, to the situation, to the various battles, to where you're fighting it, and to the leaders. Because remember, what's going to happen to Napoleon III at the very first big battle of this war? I mean, it's September of 1870. This is the first big battle. They're fighting at the Battle of Sedan. You guys remember what's going to happen to Napoleon III? He'll get captured in battle. So, Napoleon III, not a very good general. He will get captured in battle at the Battle of Sedan in September of 1870. The Prussians will keep him and hold him ransom. Meanwhile, back in France, what's happening with the politics? If they've lost their emperor. All right, they're going crazy. We'll see that things will definitely break down here, right? Things will definitely break down. So, the course of war not going to go well here for France because... first of all, Napoleon III captured at Sedan, September of 1871. Sedan, by the way, very important location. We'll hear more about them both in World War I and especially in World War II, because this is the first big fortress city on the way to Paris. This is one of the first big ones once you leave through the Black Forest that borders with between France and Germany. So this is going to be a big location. Once the Germans take Sedan and take their leader at Sedan, it looks like they've almost got an open road to Paris. So by January of 1871, the French will surrender. You notice it took a few months before they finally gave up. What was happening in Paris while this was happening? Total chaos, exactly. They had their own little mini civil war. They had people getting shot in the streets because you had communists that were having a little revolt, followed by harsh republicanism and nationalism that was trying to put down not only the Parisians that were revolting, but also trying to continue fighting against the Prussians. And meanwhile, what did the Prussians do? They just surrounded Paris and let them kill each other, right? Just surrounded them and said, well, have a good time, guys. Tell us when you're ready to surrender. So, didn't go well for France on this occasion, and so therefore we're going to get a peace treaty. Now, why would Bismarck be incredibly harsh towards France? He hates them, exactly. They are going to become the neglected stepchild of Europe here, as we'll find out, because because Prussia is going to become the seat of diplomacy, and they don't like France, and therefore, not going to have a good time for France here. So, first of all, Wilhelm I, he's going to become emperor of a united German empire. All right, and so France, not a big fan of that, because overnight, what's happening? France used to be the seat of European diplomacy. Right? They used to be the center of Europe, the epicenter of power in Europe. And now, what's happening? It's shifted over to Berlin overnight, okay? Because now we've got a German empire. Reparations are going to be massive, absolutely massive. 5 billion francs. So, this is incredible for the time period, because with inflation, I mean, you give that about 1,000% increase with the inflation. So by today's standards, that's what, like 10 times that amount right there or something like that? It's crazy. So, huge amount of inflation here that the French are going to have to end up paying. And so, not much they can do about it because they lost in the war, and so there's nothing that anyone can do to stop them. Next, Germany, they're going to get a good chunk of land. Yes?
Is that why after the Treaty of Versailles is so harsh to Germany?
So we're seeing 1919 written all over this, hopefully, right? Exactly. So in 1919, when we get the Treaty of Versailles, this is part of the reason that the French are going to be so terrible to the Germans. Okay? There are big differences, but this is part of the reason. Germany kind of had it coming after this harsh peace treaty. So then we've got Alsace-Lorraine. So this territory right here is traditionally, culturally, French. All right? You notice the name, Alsace-Lorraine, is a very French term. So this territory, though, anyone know why Germany might want it? It's very fertile. It's great for growing, foods and things. It's also got great industry that's already in the area, and they've got lots of natural resources that the Germans want and think they need. So they're going to take it over, this predominantly Catholic French area. They're going to kick out the French that are there and start to rapidly Germanize that territory by sending German folk into that area as if it's their own conquered little area. So the French are going to hate them for that too, and what are they constantly going to want as a result? They're going to want Alsace-Lorraine. They're going to want their money back. They're going to want revanche. Indeed. All right, so the French are dying for the revanche at this time. Meanwhile, Germany, how they feeling? I mean, good. You look at this map here, it used to be all these tiny little chunks of land that were all their own individual states, essentially, right? Their own little confederation. Now you've got an empire. And everyone is shaking in their freaking boots here about the fact that we've got this German empire. And it's not only that they're a bunch of people, I mean, their population is massive at this time, but not only is it a lot of people with a lot of industry and a lot of guns and bayonets, but what else is cool about these people? They are scary, and they're good at war. I mean, the last decade has proven they are really good at war. So everyone is quaking in their boots at this point of, we got to either keep Germany on our side or we got to be, ready to start building up our armies to be prepared for a war with them. And so in 1862, when Bismarck took over, Prussia was the 5th strongest power in Europe. So when Bismarck became chancellor, they were only the 5th strongest power in Europe. By 1872, 1 year after they had become a united empire, what do you think they're going to be? #1. Oh man, big time all of a sudden. They're the strongest major power of all 5. Woo! Not bad, huh? Yes. So let me see if I can remember the exact list here. So before it was France, England, Austria, Russia, then Germany, right? For Prussia. Now it's going to be Germany. Then I think England, because they've got the biggest navy and they're rapidly expanding through imperialism at this point. Then France, then Austria, then Russia. Okay? Sound about right to you guys too? All right, very good. Okay, so speaking of Russia, let's give do a quick thing on Russia here, quick slide. So we'll take a look at things that are happening in Russia. Not going all that well, honestly. But if we look back a little bit, get a little nostalgic here, and look at the reform efforts of Peter the Great. Oh, what a great guy, right? That's why they called him the Great, because he was freaking awesome. So tell me about the reform efforts of Peter the Great. Good review time here.
He went to
all right, not quite. All right, that Catherine the Great thought about it, but didn't quite go well because of Putin's revolt.
He went all around Europe and saw how other people did stuff and put back people.
There you go. That was the big thing with Peter the Great. He had the Grand Embassy. He went to the West. He started to Westernize, and then what did you say?
Beard tax.
He had the beard tax. He reformed everything in Russia, rapidly modernizing Russia. I mean, they were about 200 years behind culturally, militarily, technologically, scientifically, and now he's trying to rapidly bring them up to speed. That's going to go well during his reign. I mean, it's going to be tough, but he's going to make some definite progress. After him, though, with the exception of Catherine the Great's reforms, how are things going to go? Backwards, continuously. They're just going to keep lagging behind unless they get someone really progressive like Catherine the Great on the throne as the Tsarina, which even that, had its problems too because of things like Pugachev's revolt. So by the 1850s, we're having a hard time here in Russia because 90% of the population is agrarian. All right, why is that a problem by the time we get into the late 19th century? If 90% of your population is agrarian. Agrarian meaning that they are rural, they are farmers, they are not industrialized. Okay, you're not modernizing. You don't have industry, right? Okay, so you don't have an industrial working class. You don't have industry happening, and therefore your economy is slagging. All right. They also have incredibly backward industry. They also have incredibly backward agricultural techniques. You guys might remember back to the 1750s through the 1850s, we had a little time period known as the Agricultural Revolution. Right? You recall that? So you had much more specialized agriculture, meaning that you had guys that knew what they were doing, which is important, and they were using scientific methods to do their planting and their grain production, right? And so therefore, you could have people living in the cities and not starve to death because you didn't see all the famines. Is that the case in Russia? No, it is not, because they are about 100 years behind on that one too. And then we've got serfdom. serfdom still in place. Now, I mean, I got to give it to the Russians here. We say how backward they are, having serfdom as the basic social institution still. But in the South, in the 1850s, in America, did we not also have a similar problem? What's serfdom, essentially? Slavery. All right, except theirs is not race-based. Ours was race-based. So, I mean, all things considered, we say how backward they are. Yeah, true, but America was too, apparently, if we're going to say that. All right, so that brings us to the Crimean War. Once we get into the Crimean War, how'd things go for Russia? Not so good, remember, because they're so far behind everyone else. And remember, it's basically all of Europe against Russia, because no one liked the fact that Russia was trying to sneak in on those Ottoman Turk territories, because they thought that would upset the balance of power in Europe. So this just proved how much they had fallen behind everyone else in terms of modernization. With modernization, we mean science, technology, diplomacy, industry, farming, you name it, all of it. Okay, so that brings us to the abolition of serfdom. Right? I mean, after the war is over, we're going to have this very progressive Tsar, Czar Alexander II. Czar Alexander II, he thought that the reason they had lost in the Crimean War was because they still had such an antiquated system. He was looking at places like France that don't have serfs, right? They haven't had serfs since the Middle Ages, really. He was looking at Germany, which also no longer has serfs. Italy, all of these countries that had, given them a run for their money in the Crimean War. And he's thinking, well, maybe one thing we can do is get rid of serfdom and start to have free peasants doing better labor, better agriculture, and therefore we can start to focus more on industry instead. Okay? Now, how did it go for him? He abolished serfdom, right? Much the way Lincoln abolished slavery. He got assassinated. Exactly. However, Lincoln was assassinated for the issues of the South will rise again and that whole thing. The bitter South losing the Civil War. Whereas with the assassination of Alexander II is going to be for reasons of anarchy. Okay? But let's just talk about his plan here a little bit. What he wanted to do is, as he's abolishing serfdom, he wanted to set up collective responsibility. So what collective responsibility means is that peasants are not just being thrown to the wild here and say, all right, do your thing now, and let's hope that it goes well. Instead, what he's doing is he's setting up communities called zemstvos, where they get together and they work together to produce better crops. Because not only is he trying to get rid of an ancient institution, he's also trying to rapidly modernize the country by bringing in things like this collective idea. It's kind of like socialism, though, isn't it? Saying that all these farmers will work together on the land in order to produce better stuff. But what's the point for him? He doesn't want to be socialist. What's he trying to do?
He's trying to get them to
catch up. He wants them to catch up with the West. And so he's making an effort here. And then giving them the Zemstvo as a little bit of a representative institution to help get their ideas out there. All right? The reaction, though, is going to be an assassination 20 years later. So 1881, it's kind of sad because it's almost exactly 20 years to the day after he signed the bill that abolished serfdom. There was a lot of anarchy spreading throughout the world at this time. You might recall that President McKinley in 1901 was assassinated by an anarchist. And then we had other anarchist kinds of assassination attempts happening throughout Europe at this time, too. And what is anarchy, by the way? Review time? What's anarchy? No government. Okay, so getting rid of the government because it's corrupt or it's not working or what have you. So a bunch of anarchists got together in 1881, almost 20 years to the day, after they abolished serfdom, and Alexander II was crossing a bridge on his way to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. And as he was doing it, someone decided to throw a bomb underneath the carriage that he was riding in, and it missed. It didn't actually blow up right away. And so they just kept going, right? So the carriage just keeps going. And so then another guy from on the street throws another bomb right under the carriage. That time it blew off the wheels of the carriage, and down went the carriage. Then another guy was supposed to shoot the Tsar, but he was stopped before he was able to do so. And then another bomb was thrown from a different person in the street that went right beneath the Tsar's legs as he was trying to run away to safety. And it blew his legs off, all right? So at that point, they drug his body back into the Winter Palace and laid him on the very desk where he had signed the abolition of serfdom. And he died on that very desk, almost 20 years to the day. Isn't that crazy?
Didn't they murder the royal family like in
1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. Well, it's there. It's going to be so glorious. All right, that's 2 topics away. All right. So after this, we're going to have, you know, some czars that are not real happy about reform. But one thing that we'll get to that later when we start talking about the Bolshevik Revolution. But one thing that will happen during this time period that will be a positive for Russia is they will have a railroad boom. So thankfully, because of the abolition of serfdom, we had a lot more people that are going into industry and helping out with the railroad construction. So in 1860, there were less than 1,300 miles of railroad across the massive behemoth that is Russia, right? So over the course of the next couple of decades, they're going to rapidly expand that, bringing it up to almost 16,000 miles of railroad. Another thing that we're going to see, as you're building more and more railroads, you need more and more iron and steel, don't you? So what do you need in order to produce that stuff?
Industry.
Factories. You need factories and mines to produce minerals as well. And so as you're producing that stuff, we're going to start to see the development of industry and working class, right? So industrial development is going to come about as a result. And then along with that, we're going to see a class of modern factory workers developing. And by the way, who had started publishing some, you know, socialist-leaning materials in 1848? Yes, Karl Marx, exactly. And so Karl Marx, his ideas, he never thought they would reach Russia. He never thought in 100 years that Russia would ever be really enthusiastic about the revolutionary socialism he was proposing, let alone communism. And yet, this will be one of the first countries to really respond in a revolutionary style, as we'll find out. So that's going to be very appealing soon. Another thing I just want to throw out there for you, because he might show up on the AP exam, is Sergei Witte. Sergei Witte, he was the Minister of Finance. He was the guy that was primarily responsible for this railroad boom, because Sergei Witte viewed railroads as an economic weapon of the state. It's more than just industry, it's more than just production, it's an economic weapon of the state. How so? Yeah, you move in supplies, and then what else can you put on those trains in the event of, you know, something like another Crimean War? Troops and supplies, exactly. So it's economics, it's military, it's everything. The state is dependent upon its railroads, according to Witte. So he is going to more than double the railroads that we had already produced during that boom. And so in the 1890s, he's going to rapidly expand the railroad industries to 35,000 miles. Which is, you know, still not nearly enough, but it certainly is going to be a big help when we get into the 20th century. Why? What do you think? 20th century? 1914, for instance, what are we going to be needing big time? Okay, World War I. Those railroads will be vital to Russia. Okay, and so he's also going to start to emphasize westernization, as would any good Russian reformer at this time, because apparently the West knows what they're doing, right? Okay. All right, another cool thing about this westernization period under Sergei Witte is that by 1900, I mean, we always hear about the United States being the big oil producers because of people like Rockefeller and Standard Oil, right? But Russia is actually, by 1900, going to produce half of the world's oil production in the first 10 or 15 years of the 20th century because of guys like Sergei Witte, who were saying, all right, look what the United States is doing with their oil. Let's do that same thing, and then people will want our stuff. And so Russia's going to become not an economic powerhouse, but they're certainly going to be more important. All right? Good? All right, good. So let's take the quiz.